The first round of the WNBA playoffs ended earlier this week, and I just can't help but think. The WNBA left a lot of money on the table. And no, this isn't only because Caitlin Clark got eliminated, even though that's undoubtedly a factor, but it's because of their outdated first-round playoff format. The first round of the WNBA playoffs only being a 3-game series, with the first 2 home games being at the higher-seeded team's arena, lost the league a lot of money. The first round of the WNBA playoffs have never been attractive, so it was specifically designed to maximize travel costs and get through that round as quickly as possible. But things are different now. The fact the WNBA didn't change it before this season is a clear indicator that they severely underestimated the popularity that Caitlin would bring, and they definitely underestimated the growth of other teams. Across the board, viewership is significantly higher, the most obvious example being games Caitlin Clark is in. Even when going against NFL Sunday, Game 1 of the Sun and Fever received more viewership than any WNBA playoff game last year. But when they weren't competing with football, Caitlin Clark was able to draw in 2.5 million viewers. This is the most viewed WNBA playoff game of the century. If this was a best out of 5 series, we would have been guaranteed at least one game of the Indiana Fever playing a playoff game at home. The game would have at least got a 2 million viewership average, maybe even 3 million if they are smart enough to avoid Thursday night football. But it's not just the Indiana Fever series, where a massive amount of potential viewership was lost. Yes, the other games didn't pull in the crazy audience Caitlin Clark did, but they still pulled in significantly bigger television audiences than last year. Game 2 of the Storm and Aces matchup nearly reached 1 million viewers. This game had more viewers than any game during the Aces and Liberty final last year. The Minnesota Lynx versus the Phoenix Mercury game was the biggest surprise. The game was able to net 1.2 million viewers. This was a late Tuesday night game, and it got more viewership than any game of the 2023 playoff. It should be said that the Atlanta and New York series by far performed the worst during Game 2, which makes sense considering how uncompetitive the series was. That's the one playoff series where the WNBA was better off with the current first-round playoff format. Atlanta having next to zero chance of winning means viewership most likely would have dropped, and attendance would have been limited due to Atlanta's small gym. But the other playoff series clearly showed potential for viewership. If there was hypothetically a Game 3 on Thursday, the WNBA could have expected a cumulative viewership in the millions. The Fever game easily would have been over 1 million viewers again, and the other playoff series probably would have broke 500,000. If they found a way to avoid Thursday night football, which would be the smart thing to do, they could have had multiple games averaging over 1 million viewers each, and who even knows how much the Fever and Sun game would have pulled in just by itself. The potential viewership was a big loss, but the ticket sales was a much bigger loss. It's not an exaggeration to say millions of dollars were lost when you factor in the ticket revenue and the local economy boosts. Unlike viewership numbers, we don't have to speculate how many fans would have shown up in attendance, because we have data of when these teams played each other in the regular season. The biggest loss is easily the Fever not being able to host at least one game. That game would have been a guaranteed sellout of 17,000 fans. And considering the stakes of that game, the ticket prices would have been outrageous. When Seattle hosted the Aces twice this year, both games were packed. The July game had over 12,000 people in attendance, while the September game had over 14,000 in attendance. If a game with barely any stakes had over 14,000 people show up, you best believe it would have been a sellout for an elimination playoff game. The Minnesota Lynx played the Mercury in their house 3 times this year. In all those games, the attendance was over 9,000. As with the viewership, the only series where they wouldn't have gained anything is the Atlanta Dream series. The Atlanta Dream desperately need to get out of that high school-sized gym. Even if you round down the averages for the games I just mentioned, by not having a best out of 5 series, which would guarantee at least one home game for each team, the WNBA lost well over 40,000 ticket sales. Keep in mind, this number could easily double depending on how many lower-seeded teams are able to steal a victory against the higher-seeded team. The ticket sales are just one thing. Just think about all the hotel reservations and flights that didn't happen, merchandise in the local arenas that weren't bought, or food purchases that didn't happen. It adds up. The WNBA gets a pass for not expecting the ridiculous growth that would happen this season, but there's no excuse for next season. I think the ideal format for the first round would be best out of 5. By having a best out of 5 but keeping the first 2 games at the higher-seeded team's arena, you get best of both worlds. Traveling costs are still optimized, but now the away team is guaranteed at least one game. The arenas will be packed as fans know they might not see their team again until next season. The viewing experience will be great as the lower-seeded team will be fighting for their lives in front of their own fans. I have a feeling this will happen sooner rather than later, as the TV networks will most likely push for it. After decades of operation, the WNBA is finally in a place where it can make some legitimate money. But that's it for this video. Do you believe the WNBA fumbled by not having the first round be a best out of 5? And do you think this will change next year? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.